What's up YouTube, it's Martin from Yes I'm a Designer. Today I have something very special for you. I am going to review superhero movie posters. I'm going to start with the worst and I'm going to work my way up and show you my favorite one or the best design. And once again, this is from a graphic design point of view. So I'm going to teach you a lot of things about composition, layout, color theory, typography, and all that good stuff. So if you want to learn about graphic design and geek out at the same time on superheroes, then this video is perfect for you. Alright, so we are here in Photoshop and let's get started with number 10. So this is the worst one on the list, and it's no surprise that it is the Spider-Man Homecoming. You probably are familiar with this, and it was a very controversial design. I've actually done a what went wrong video on this, where I analyze and scrutinize the design much closer, and in that video I also quickly go through and show how I think it can be improved. So I won't repeat the things I mentioned in that video, but in a nutshell, the colors are off, the balance is off, and most importantly, the proportions are off. We have floating heads, especially Tony Stark here on the right side. So he's literally just floating around in space, which makes him look really odd, and the general composition fails mainly because of that, I would say. But as I said, I don't want to go into much detail on this. I want to just quickly mention that, of course, every movie comes with multiple different versions of posters, and this was just one of many. We have another version, which I think works much better already. Less characters, but they form a really interesting composition. It's very dynamic. It's also, in terms of colors, works much better. But let's move on to number 9. I chose Batman vs Superman, the Dawn of Justice poster. First of all, one of the biggest problems I have with this poster is that it is very static. So in general sense, it is not a bad composition, or it would be quite a good composition, because it forms a triangle. The three main characters forms a triangle, sort of, which is not bad. But then here are the problems with that. First of all, we have Batman completely lost. So we don't have a good silhouette of him. He's actually, the only thing we properly see of him is this silhouette. Now the problem with that silhouette is that we don't even see properly the ears, which are so crucial to Batman, to his character, to see his character. And that is a big problem. So if I just draw this back again, so this is all we see of him. Then if I draw the outline of Superman, we see sort of something like this. We can't see much more because the cape is so dark, it's sort of lost in the background. So again, even though they try to show the cape, which is a very important detail for Superman, it is lost because of the darkness and the general atmosphere or mood that they created with the colors. So once again, silhouette is really bad. One of the other biggest problems that I have with this poster, it is hard to tell where the horizon is because we have a very bright spot here. We can't actually say this is the horizon, and because there is the sword of Wonder Woman, that actually is very misleading. It almost feels like when you first look at this poster, it almost feels like that is the horizon. So something like that. But then this line here wouldn't work. So you would feel like something is off. And in a general sense, I feel like the perspective is really poor in this composition. We have sort of a dent in the buildings here in the background, which I can't really say for certain that we have in the foreground. Like Superman should be standing something like that, if that was the angle, but he's actually standing more like this. So there's a contradiction between the background and the foreground, and even the foreground, this pedestal or whatever they are standing on, is a very distinct perspective we have here, so we can see that defined. And to be honest, even Wonder Woman standing close to the edge of this doesn't really feel grounded in this perspective. So I would say she should be standing something like that. So the legs should be something like that to feel like she is in that perspective. Obviously, I'm just making very rough notes here, but hopefully you can see what I mean. So they feel like they are just put together, stacked on this background, and the background is also just sort of placed in there to make it work and giving some depth. So yeah, I'm really not happy with the general perspective and the composition as well in this poster. And just out of interest, if I flip it around, it helps to see it with a fresh eye. We have a lot of details and things going on one side, while the other side is very empty. Sometimes when you have a composition out of balance can create tension, but in this case I don't think it worked well enough. So even though this poster has the potential to be great, unfortunately it fails on many different levels, and that's why I count it as number 9 on my list. But let's move on to number 8. So the X-Men poster that I chose, The Last Stand, is an interesting one. We have a lineup of characters all looking at us and walking towards us, with Wolverine in the center. You can see that when I have the center lines, he is pretty much exactly in the center, although we have a slight tilt in the composition. So if we were to have them straight, it would be something like that, which would make it a little bit too static, I guess, and that's why they chose this subtle angle. But the problem with subtlety sometimes is that it falls short. So if they wanted to create a diagonal composition, they should have added a little bit more of an angle. So something like that, or even maybe more of an angle, would have made it more interesting and more dynamic. But then the biggest problem for me is the background. So we have a very flat, boring background. And again, the clouds don't really feel like they are in the same perspective as the characters. So we have a very strong vanishing point going somewhere around there, and the sky just doesn't follow that. So if we were to see the same thing in the sky, the clouds should be receding towards that point, but they are really flat and they don't follow this perspective at all. Another problem that I have with this image, and we can see that really well if I turn on this adjustment, the threshold adjustment, which creates a more graphic look of the poster, is that we have a very strong contrast on a character that's not really relevant. I don't even know the name of this character, but the guy with the wings, he is the one really that is the focus point or focal point of the composition, because that's where we have the biggest contrast. So once again, if you look at the threshold option, of course we have contrast on Wolverine and Storm, but as you can see, the guy with the wings, who stands out because of his wings and of course also because of his naked upper body. And here's another issue. When you have things overlapped on top of each other, like in this case we have a lot of characters, you have to be very careful how you place them, making sure that the silhouette again is not lost. One of the most important characteristic features of Wolverine are obviously the claws. So we have the claws in here and we have them here. If you blur your vision and look at the poster, you won't necessarily be able to see those claws. And there's a reason for that, because it is very closely aligned to the wings, and in brightness and color, it is almost exactly the same as the wings. So when you blur your vision, these claws here on the right will get sort of merged together with the wings of that character. Again, he is one of the main problems that I have with this poster. And on the left side, the highlights of the cape that Storm is wearing again is sort of blending together with the clothes. So this was number 8, but let's move on to number 7, which is another DC Comics poster. The Justice League again had lots of different posters, and some of them are brilliant, like this one, which is much more successful to the one that I just showed you before. But coming back to this one, my main problem here is that the poster is just too claustrophobic. All the characters are really squashed together. It makes it feel weird and odd to have them standing that close to each other in the first place. But then there's also the issue with the lighting, that they chose a specific lighting for Batman, making sure that we can't see the eyes. So they are lit with a very strong light coming from above, and that creates these shadows over the eyes. And we can see that on all of them, but this lighting is not really helping in general. Apart from making Batman look menacing, it doesn't really help Wonder Woman or any of the other characters, to be honest. But another thing that I wanted to mention about this poster that still is a little bit forced, in my opinion, is the actual typography. So we have a very condensed font, but then it has these characters replaced with the symbols of each of these superheroes. So we have the S for Superman, we have the Bat symbol for Batman, Wonder Woman's W, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go through all of them. It's smart that they managed to put them all into one sentence, but in my opinion, it ended up being really forced. But again, this is number 7, so let's move on to number 6, which is the Iron Man poster from 2008. First of all, this is getting definitely better. So if I were to make notes here, so we have a very strong sense of diagonal lines. So let me just draw a few more of them. So in general, this is what we can see in the composition immediately. So this is emphasized by the rocket lines that we have here on the right. And then we have also the planes going that direction, and also generally the placement of the faces. But then if we look at the composition with the center lines, again, quite a strong differentiation between the two sides of the poster. So we have Iron Man, really like close up of him on one side, and then we have all the rest of the characters and details on the other side. It is also interesting to have a look at this composition with the golden spiral. So if you're not familiar with the spiral, this is based on the Fibonacci sequence, which is a sequence of numbers artists have been using for a long time to create engaging compositions. And if a poster is following the golden spiral, then normally here around this point is where you place your focal point. Now, if we see it like this, we can clearly see that the focal point is Iron Man's mask. And if it's on the other side, then it sort of shows Tony Stark. Also, it's worth mentioning that when you're using the spiral, this line is quite important, and it is actually used for placing her character and aligning her exactly to that line. And another important line in the composition would be this one, which again helps to direct attention to this character here at the bottom. In terms of composition, I think this poster is doing well, but the reason I chose it to be number 6 on the list is because there's a couple of additional things that I don't think work as well, like the lighting. So we have a very strong lighting on most of the characters coming from the right side, which is fine, but then her character's lighting has also a very strong light coming from this angle, and both sides, to be honest, so that doesn't really match. And then obviously here with the Iron Man suit has a completely different lighting, it's more like a backlight. But my biggest concern, and the reason why it didn't go higher on the list, is this negative space in the design. So it just has a very big gap in the center of the composition, and it is not really an interesting division between the two sides of the poster. So what I mean, they would have been able to make it a little bit more clever, the way the two sides collide, instead of just leaving a huge gap there in the middle. But yeah, so in a nutshell, this is not a bad poster, it's getting better. But let's move on to the next one in the list. So that's number 5, and we have the first Thor movie poster from 2011. Now, what I love about this poster is that we have a sense of action, Thor landing on the ground. It is a perfect comic book superhero pose, and we have an amazing silhouette of him. So a really well-defined silhouette. We can see the hammer as well clearly. So it's just really well-defined. And plus, we have in the background all of these concrete slabs flying, which again creates that explosion and sense of movement that he just arrived and everything is shattering around him. But what further emphasizes this movement are the vertical lines that we have dividing the faces above. So these lines again help to achieve that movement, that he's arriving on the ground and everything is shattering around him. But even though it's a great composition here at the bottom, so I love this area, I'm not too fond of the details here on the top. So my biggest problem with the upper third of the composition, which we can check by having the rule of thirds on, which divides the composition both vertically and horizontally into thirds, we have the characters too tight again, like cropped into this frame, the individual frames we have there. And yes, we can argue that this is a great way of getting really the attention to the eyes, so they are all staring at us, which is great, but it doesn't really give a good outline to them. And I would say the worst is Loki's character, where he's not even centered within that space that he has, so there's more space on the right than on the left, and we can hardly recognize him because of the light and the colors, and in general that tight crop that I mentioned before. So even though the bottom 2/3 of the poster is doing really well, the top third is not as great, and that's why in general I couldn't give this poster a better ranking than number 5 on the list. But let's move on to number 4, which I chose the Avengers Age of Ultron poster from 2015, and we are getting very close to the first 3. So here what I love mainly is the perspective that we have. It's a very tricky perspective, so we are looking at them from below, and we have a very interesting circular composition. So when you look at everything in the image, you will get these curves, so you will notice them. So that's, first of all, the perspective was set up like that, but also all the alignment of the characters. And even here in the background, all of these things are placed in a way that we get that circular composition. And it is a really tricky one to get right. Even the bow here, and even the big muscly arm of Hulk is further emphasizing that curved look. So because it is a very tricky perspective to pull off, and because they managed to do it right, I think this deserves a really high up position in the list for ranking these posters. And the main reason why this didn't make it to my first 3 is this area around here. I feel is probably the weakest of the whole composition. So Black Widow and Iron Man sort of gets merged together. There's not a clear division there. So we can see a very clear division between Captain America and Iron Man, but as I said here on the left side, that's sort of lost, that line there. And this is an unfortunate placement, because when you have things so closely aligned to each other, they almost feel like she's holding that letter, and I'm sure that wasn't the intention. So you have to be very careful with these things. What I think would have worked much better if they had her a little bit face more like there, so the arm is going this way, and that actually would allow her other arm as well maybe to come a bit further down, and as I said, have a little bit more distinction there. Would have made it work better in my opinion. And just one other thing about depth and perspective, I think Nick Fury's character is the one that doesn't really integrate with the rest of the characters. So even these characters here in the background work really well in terms of the composition. So I'm not even sure whether he's supposed to be in front of Hawkeye or behind him. Let's just zoom a little bit closer to this. Hawkeye's quiver and bow is clearly in front of Nick Fury, so that makes it look like he's in the background, so he's behind. But because once again we don't have a clear distinction here, and his shoulder is almost perfectly aligned with the quiver and the outline of Hawkeye, this again is a bit confusing here. So just like we had that confusing outline around here, to be honest, this is still better than that one in the background, but these two confusing outlines make that corner the weakest, while I love what's going up here with this spiral or whirlpool that we get from all those curved lines. And now we are ready to move on to the first 3, but before I show you them, I wanted to show you a few special achievements. So I gave the awards to these posters because what they managed to achieve. First of all, we have the Avengers Infinity War. And now you might be upset that this is not my first or even second or third. It is an amazing poster, but I gave it the special award of being the poster that managed to pull off the most difficult thing, to have so many characters on it at the same time and still work as a composition. And there's another version of the same poster where we have this cool distinction of the characters into groups by using the light emitting from the central Avengers logo. Again, it is doing a really good job. So these lines are both cropping details, like here we can clearly see it, but also we have details coming out of those frames. So that's really smart. Again, we have a strong crop here, but then details coming out of the frame. Again, cropped there, but then detail coming out, and so on and so forth. Again, here we have the strong crop, but then the heads are popping out of the frame. So that is a very smart composition, again, with a lot of characters in it. And last but not least, I wanted to also show as a special achievement, the complete opposite of this is the Ant-Man and the Wasp poster, which is coming out soon. It's not even out yet, but I was really astonished by the poster when I first seen it in the cinema and realized that we have the two characters, the tiny characters here in the poster. So if I zoom closer, we will see them better, but because it's a low resolution version of the poster, we can't really see much detail there. So this is the ultimate negative space in a movie poster I've ever seen. So obviously the title is really big, but compared to that, there's nothing else going on. So all this background is empty and we have the tiny little characters there. And they actually chose to put the characters in the center and a little bit higher than the center point. So the vertical center is here, but the actual visual center normally is a little bit higher, around 60% within the poster. So that's what they chose, it seems like, which is a good placement for them. And just to show that obviously there's another version of the same poster where we have all the characters. And by the way, this is a really cool diagonal composition. Remember the X-Men where they force that tilt on the characters and they try to get the diagonal composition going on like that. Here we have the character standing straight, but the holding devices and these crops are creating that diagonal action, which I think works so much better. But still, you can see the little characters there in the poster. So it uses what we've seen in the one with the negative space, but also manages to put all the additional characters in it. Really smart, clever poster. I love it. Now that we talked about these, let's move on to number 3. So the third one that I chose is the Civil War, Captain America Civil War. And there's a couple of reasons why I picked this one as number 3. First of all, it is an amazing symmetrical composition. So it really works for this title because we have the two opposing sides, also having a hierarchy from the most important characters to the less and less important ones in the background. And if I bring up the golden spiral, you will see that it was again used perfectly in this case, having the focal point on Iron Man's eye, or like his gaze, which is the most important one. So this is really a face-off. They are staring at each other. So the two main focal point will be the eyes. So that's Tony Stark's gaze if we are looking at it from this side. And obviously we get the same one on the left side because of the symmetrical composition. So that is working brilliantly. Even the subtitle, United We Stand, Divided We Fall, is equal on the left and the right side. So they really paid attention to a lot of details here. We also have the different colors in the background. We have the blue and then the red, again, for the two opposing sides. Not to mention that these colors are complementary colors. So if we look at the color wheel, we have the reds and on the opposite side we have the blues. So that again creates that strong contrast in terms of colors as well. Although I love this one, let's move on to the second one. This is the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is a very graphic poster with a lot of things going on, similar to the Infinity War. But in my opinion, this is better because of the overall composition. So first of all, we have obviously that big circle in the background. So that is already a nice framing for the whole composition. Then we also have the star. So if I just reduce the opacity of this, you can see it really well showing in the composition. And because of the main character is Star-Lord, and obviously the whole thing is in space, that just really works and emphasizes the story. But apart from the shapes that we can see here, we have a very cool dynamic composition with a lot of things going on, but still working, a very strong perspective, everything going centrally to the center of the image. So if we bring up the center lines, you can see that composition working there. And then if I bring up the rule of thirds, that again shows us the interesting focal points. So we have Drax exactly placed in one of the first most important focal points if we are looking at it from the rule of thirds point of view. So the top left is usually the first one that most viewers would jump to. Then we have this one here, which is, well, sort of it is Groot, to be honest. So this focal point would be around Groot. And then we have the bottom 2 points, the gun that Rocket is holding, and then I don't want to go into more detail where the other point is pointing at. But yeah, so in general, this is a brilliant composition. I love it to bits. And most importantly, I love the poses of these characters. For example, Star-Lord has that cool, almost like a dance move that he's doing there, which works perfectly with his character. And if you just remember going back to what we've seen before, like in this case, these poses are just so stiff and static compared to what we see here. Of course, you can argue that the Batman vs. Superman wants to show that depressing, dark atmosphere that goes with the story, while this one is a very colorful and upbeat poster. But still, because we are talking about superhero movie posters, poses that we get in the characters are very important, and the silhouettes and outlines. So even though it's so colorful and bursting with detail, we can still get an amazing outline of all of these characters, and they have a very interesting dynamic pose on all of them. And yes, we arrived to the point that I can reveal the overall winner of this contest. But before I show you that, I wanted to quickly show you, without damaging your eyes, the worst superhero movie poster ever made, in my opinion. This one is just really bad on a lot of levels. I don't even want to go into listing the issues that I have with this, but feel free to comment if you think there are worse movie posters than this. But without any further delay, a harsh contrast in terms of composition and excellence. Here is the overall winner. Drum roll, and let's turn on the Thor Ragnarok poster. Again, you might not be happy with my choice. You might think that there are better posters. Again, feel free to comment if you have a better idea or a choice for the best superhero movie poster. But the reason I chose this is because, first of all, we have 9 rings in the composition that can be interpreted as the 9 worlds. So we have Asgard, Midgard, Nilfheim, Muspelheim, and so on and so forth from the Scandinavian folklore. Then we also have a reference to the Tree of Life, or Yggdrasil, which in this case represented with these details that look more like branches here on the top. And then we have the trunk down there. So a very simplified way of showing you where the tree is in the composition. And on top of all of this, we have a really cool 80s vibe also that obviously was present in the film as well. But they managed to get that right using this type or treatment that we have on the type, the colors in general, and these funky outlines that we have on these containers. Now, even though I picked this as the overall winner, of course, you can argue that it has its flaws. So for example, these very strong black lines in the background, in my opinion, are a little bit too strong, and they sort of get blended in with the headgear that the villain is wearing. Also, they sort of resemble the radioactive sign, which might be a reference to the Ragnarok or end of the world, or maybe not. But I just feel like this is a little bit too strong in terms of the overall composition. Plus also we have this strange shape going across the composition, which is the only thing that is not symmetrical, or the only dominant detail that is not symmetrical, so we don't see another shape going this way. This might be useful to break up the whole symmetry, but I feel like, again, it's a little bit too overpowering, especially around here. So on the bottom, around this part, it looks fine, but here it's a little bit overpowering, especially because it's sharing the same color as Hulk. So even though it's an amazing poster, there are a couple of flaws, but overall I don't want to be too critical because I love this poster, and to be honest, most of these posters I really admire and love. Even the last one in the list, I think it has its merits. And I don't want to come across harsh or negative about any of the things that I mentioned here. I would love to hear what you think, whether I missed any important details, either good or bad, about the posters I listed here. And I would love to know what type of other collection of posters you would like me to review next time. So I hope you found this video useful, and if you want to see more content like this, make sure you hit subscribe, like, share, and all of those lovely things underneath. So I will see you guys in the next one.